Welcome to the NCDWI Guide podcast, where defenders of the Constitution assemble to prepare for courtroom battle and firm owners gather to develop marketing strategies that will revolutionize the practice of criminal defense. Here's your host, the NCDWI guy, Jake Minnick.
Hello, fellow freedom fighters, and welcome to episode 84 of the NCDWI Guy podcast. On today's episode, we are talking about client communication. Fundamental. This is important stuff. Got a lot of great tips and advice on effective client communication. This is so incredibly important to the success of your firm. Again, fundamental, but getting it right is absolutely critical if you want to provide wow client experience to your clients. So we're going to be talking about client communication. Before we dive into that, want to make an announcement about an upcoming CLE that is being offered through the North Carolina Advocates for Justice on Friday, February the 18th of 2022. There will be a CLE that will be both virtual and live. You can go actually be in person with one another again in Raleigh. Great list of speakers. I'm included, so I have to pat myself on the back. But great list of speakers. This CLE is how to utilize expert witnesses in impaired driving cases, North Carolina impaired driving cases. Chaz Post has put this together. Really great list of topics and speakers. Ron Shook, Justin Hunter, Kelly Dawkins, and Anna Feltz will be speaking, as well as experts Doug Scott and Andrew Evans. So it's going to be a really incredible list of topics that are going to be discussed. Go to the North Carolina Advocates for Justice website to check it out and then sign up for it. You got to get in on this action. It's going to be a great opportunity for learning how to use expert testimony in your DWI case. So with that, we'll dive into today's episode. And again, in terms of client communication, this starts with the initial interaction with the client, whether that's something that they receive in the mail from you, a brochure, whether that is your website, whether that is the person that is speaking to them on the phone, whether that is your conversation with them during the initial consultation. We've talked about how to conduct a good initial consultation on episode 14 of the podcast. So go take a listen to that episode if you want to specifically hear how good communication is utilized during that lengthy initial conversation with the potential client. But this is something that every single time you are speaking to the client, whether it's through writing, email, website, letter that you are sending, communication through yourself or your staff orally, everything is included in this communication concern. Before I get too much into the suggestions and advice in how to have great, effective client communication, I want to first of all put a disclaimer on this that by no means am I perfect at client communication. And as much as we have tried at the office to put in systems and processes, this is not an easy thing to constantly give great client communication. This is something we are constantly working at and trying to improve upon, figuring out ways that we can make our client communication better. But it really is one of the most amazing ways that you can show the client how much you care. It really is. And it's important to get it right. And here's one of the main reasons why it's important to get it right. Bill Gates said, the need to communicate effectively with your customers will come up again and again. This is not an issue that's going to go away. If as long as you are practicing law, you're going to be communicating with people, with your clients, with your team, with other people that are outside of the office, the DAs, communicating with the judges, communicating with people that are in the community. This is not something that is going to go away. You're going to have to figure out how to effectively communicate. Got to figure out a way to effectively communicate. One other quote that I love on this front is from George Bernard Shaw. He said, "The single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it has taken place." The single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it has taken place. I think as lawyers, we can often be delusional when it comes to whether or not client communication has occurred. How often have you thought yourself or heard another attorney say, my client didn't know what he was supposed to do in court, didn't bring in the right documents, didn't know what he was supposed to say, despite the fact that we had talked about this, despite the fact that I had gone over this with him. There is this belief that because you communicate something, the other person fully understands it on the first go around. And that is a delusional idea, truly delusional. If you expect your client to understand the first time you tell them to do something, that they're going to be able to soak that in and perfectly figure out how to make it happen, you're delusional. Don't be delusional, because it will be incredibly frustrating and you're not going to get the end right result. Your client's going to have to come back and ask you for more information. So marketing, this is important for marketing because marketing is based on relationships. Marketing is based on relationships. Branding is based on relationships. It's based on the trustworthiness, the credibility that your firm, your business brings to the public. The most important relationship that most lawyers think of when they think of a relationship is the attorney-client relationship. This is the highest relationship. It's what we talk about throughout law school. This is what we talk about throughout ethics classes, throughout different projects that we might be involved in law school. How are we managing and improving and living up to the attorney-client relationship? It is a sacred relationship in a lot of ways, right? Confidentiality stems from this attorney-client relationship. All kinds of responsibilities for an attorney stem from this attorney-client relationship. It is an incredibly important relationship. So how do you foster this important relationship? Well, relationships grow through communication. That's how relationships grow, through communication. The more communication, the better the relationship. This is true in marriage. This is true in terms of your relationship with your kids. This is true in terms of your relationship with friends. This is true in terms of your relationship with God. If you're not communicating, if you're not spending time talking to the person that you are trying to build a relationship with, that relationship is headed in the wrong direction. As communication dwindles or dies, so will the relationship. The reason why you're not friends with your buddies from high school, from college, from your first job, whoever it might be, the reason you're not friends with those people anymore is because you don't communicate with them. If you are still friends with somebody that you knew 20 years ago, it's because you've kept that communication going. You've continued to foster the relationship through communication. So if you want to grow an incredible relationship with your client, if you want to have a rock star attorney-client relationship, you can only do that with rock star communication. That's how you win. That is where that relationship is going to grow. If you want any professional relationships to grow, then this is going to start with excellent communication. So in terms of communication being required, when is communication required? Well, if you have no other reason than thinking that communication is a good idea, if you don't think that this is important, it's not only important, it's mandatory. So North Carolina Rules of Professional Conduct 1.4 says that an attorney shall, mandatory language, keep the client reasonably informed about the status of a matter, promptly comply with reasonable requests about information, and explain a matter to the extent reasonably necessary to permit the client to make informed decisions regarding the representation. So you got to keep the client reasonably informed. You've got to comply with requests for information from your client, and you have to explain to the extent reasonably necessary to permit a client to make informed decisions what is going on in their case. So not only is client communication a good idea, and we'll talk about this more, but it is mandatory, right? And generally speaking, if you shouldn't be looking to just comply with the rules of professional conduct. You should be looking to exceed the rules of professional conduct. But again, this is how important this communication is, that it is carved out in the rules. It's not just a suggestion, it's mandatory. You think that this language that was just read from from Rule 1.4 would be self-evident. But the bar has put this into a formal rule because in the legal profession, some people find communication with clients, quote, difficult, right? It's difficult. It's incredible to me that a group of people that make all their money from communicating, writing briefs and motions, orally arguing in court, speaking at CLEs and other professional environments, has such a difficult time calling a client to discuss their case. That's how we make our money, is through communication. The written word, the oral word, communicating with other human beings is literally our entire job. That's our entire job. And yet it's one of the highest reasons that bar complaints get filed against attorneys is because they are not communicating with their clients. Insane. It's crazy. And we'll talk about some of the barriers to communication because they are real and they do exist. But just think about how wild it is that our entire job is to communicate well with other human beings. And yet we so often struggle to have a phone call with a client. Why is communicating with a client so hard? Well, let's look at some of the common excuses in regards to client communication and demystify those excuses. Let's get rid of them. We got to address them head on, but let's get rid of them. So one of the main reasons that failure to communicate occurs is because of a belief that we have a lack of time. We have a lack of time to communicate. Just don't have time to talk to my client. I'm stuck in court. I'm on the road doing new client consultations, preparing documents, reviewing discovery. There is no time. Let me give you a reality check. Court is the perfect place to answer client emails. If you don't own a laptop, then you're in big trouble. If you don't own a iPad or a phone that you could send emails from, you are in big trouble and at a major competitive disadvantage because everybody owns a laptop. Court is the perfect place to answer client emails. Take your laptop and answer emails in court. That should not be an excuse. Call people back on your 45-minute drive from one place to the next. Many of us in district court are road warriors. We're going from one county to the next. Turn off the radio, get on the phone, and call clients back. Use that as your client callback time. I cannot tell you how many client consultations, phone calls that I have returned from court. On the way back and forth to the office, from one county to the next, there are hours of time in your week if you are handling cases in multiple jurisdictions. Hours of time. Utilize that drive time. The myth that there is not enough time is really a scheduling problem and not a time problem. It's a scheduling problem. Personally, I have a 2-hour block of time on Friday afternoons that I set up to speak with current clients. Now, that sometimes changes from one week to the next, but generally from 1 to 3 in the afternoon, that's when I'm trying to schedule my client callbacks on Friday. That makes it easier for the people at the office that are scheduling these clients to be called back for me, because they know that this is when I'm going to be calling clients back. If somebody doesn't have an emergency that needs to be addressed today, something that my team cannot help them with, put them on for Friday afternoon. Figure out where your regular callback time is going to be, either on a daily basis or at least on a weekly basis. You're going to make it easier to get these things done if you have a designated time for them. Have that designated time. It's a way also for your clients to have a repetition. Client that knows that there is going to be a callback regularly on a Friday afternoon is not going to be concerned that that is when the call is getting set up. In the action plan that we use for new DWI clients, one of the first paragraphs in that action plan is in regards to client communication. And in my action plan, it says I typically try to schedule calls back for Friday afternoons. I'm setting the expectation from the outset. Client calls are important, and you need to set aside regular and recurring time for them. Don't be delusional. Don't think that clients are not going to have questions. They absolutely are going to have questions. If you do not have a time in your schedule for addressing those questions and concerns, you are delusional. That means that you don't think that you should be getting client calls, and you absolutely are going to be. So don't create a delusional schedule. You have to have time built into your schedule for calling clients back. You don't have to have a lot of time to communicate poorly. That's the real issue. This is part of the demystification. If you think that you don't have enough time to communicate with clients, the reality of the situation is that you don't have enough time not to communicate well with clients. If you're not communicating well with clients, it is going to cost you way more time. The extreme example of this is that you're going to be responding to a bar complaint at some point, and that is going to be anxiety provoking, time consuming, frustrating. It's going to take a lot of energy and effort. So that's like worst case scenario. But even in the day-to-day life, you do not have time to communicate poorly. If a client has called you 12 times, you will, once you then answer that phone call, return that phone call, you will spend the first 10 minutes of your conversation de-escalating the situation and apologizing for your lack of responsiveness before you get to the 1-minute question that necessitated the phone call. That's just the reality of the situation. If you're continually ignoring the client phone call, you're going to have to eventually answer that question. It's not going to go away. But what you are creating is a poor client experience. So that's bad. But then you're actually not only pushing back when you have to answer the question, now the conversation is going to be longer because you have to, first of all, communicate with the client, apologize for the delayed response. You're going to now have to try to rebuild the trust with the client and say, here's what we can do moving forward to get your questions answered. And then you're still going to have to answer whatever the question was that necessitated the phone call in the first place. You're not only delaying the inevitable by not calling back, but you're creating a longer phone call. And I cannot tell you how many times I have personally done that. I haven't called back on the first time. The second time, my staff is like, you need to call this person back. They need to talk to you. And by the time I've called them back, now they are frustrated with the lack of communication or the fact that I missed a scheduled phone call. And so again, I'm working from behind. I'm trying to get back to the place where I can just be in a situation where they can trust the answer that I'm going to give to the question because I've damaged the attorney-client relationship. So it's really important to rid yourself of this idiotic thought that you do not have enough time for effective communication. The reality of the situation, the new thought that you need to replace this with is that you do not have time to communicate poorly. You just don't have time. You will not have time to communicate poorly. Second reason that a lot of people fail to communicate, a lot of lawyers fail to communicate well with clients, is that client communication is low priority. These are just low priority. They're low priority, so you put them on the back burner. You put them on the back burner and let them sit there, let them simmer. When you don't make calling clients a priority, they will know that. They will sense that. If you're not making your client a priority, they can tell. You're not able to hide that well, right? And I've had clients that have been very understanding about this. When I get on the phone with them, really appreciate you taking my phone call. I know you have a busy schedule in court, so I really appreciate you taking the time. So I have plenty of clients that are very grateful when I talk to them. And that's kind of crazy because that really should just be the expectation that if you've hired me to do something for you, I'm going to call you back. In what other place would you walk into an office, pay somebody $2,500, and then they just didn't call you back? That is not a good business experience, right? If you're going in and paying somebody a large sum of money, and really what you're trying to do is have them understand your situation so that they can effectively communicate with you, and then they just don't call you back, that is incredibly disturbing, right? That is not going to create a good relationship. But don't fool yourself into believing that clients can't tell that they are low on your priority list. They can tell that. They're going to sense it and remember that down the road. However, when you go out of your way to respond to clients quickly, then you're telling them that their questions and concerns are important. You're telling them that they are important. When you call somebody back quickly, you're saying, I think you're important. That's what you're effectively saying to that person. I know this is causing anxiety for you to not have the answer to this piece of information that you're looking for, and I want to get that in your hands as soon as possible. That's not just giving them the information they need. You are communicating to the client that they are important. That's what that quick response time does. It says you, the client, are important. Believe me, clients know. They know that your time is valuable and they don't want to waste it. Like I said, I've had clients that have gone out of their way to say, I really appreciate you taking my phone call. I know that you've got a busy schedule. I know that you've got other things going on. and they don't want to waste that time. They really do appreciate that. As much as that makes me feel good, it is really insane that somebody that would pay me would feel that way. That somebody that would pay me to represent them would feel that way. And that shows a problem with our industry, right? Because the only reason that it is in the psyche of many clients that we are really busy is because that's what's been communicated for decades, that we're just not going to have time for you. And so when you actually get on the phone with the client or have a prompt response, and the client sits there and says, man, I can't believe how quickly you got back with me, we have a track record of crappy customer service as a legal industry, as lawyers. What if clients expected quick response time? And some obviously do, but what if that was just the expectation? Well, then that would indicate that as an industry, we are good at getting back to people. And let me tell you something, as other businesses outside the legal industry in a constant information world get better and better at giving instantaneous information to clients, the gap between the legal industry and every other customer service oriented industry is going to get larger in terms of the communication gap. And it's going to cause more and more problems. What we need to do as a group is be on the forefront of that instantaneous response. Figure out ways to get information into your client's hands more quickly, more effectively through multiple sources. That is where great client satisfaction comes from. That's where going above and beyond what is expected comes from. Over delivering. We need to be over delivering in communication. And it's really not that hard because we've set the bar relatively low for ourselves. When you get a client that hires you, do not forget that one of the things that is most important to your business, one of the things that is most important to the client, the reason that they're coming to you in the first place is to buy information. We are in the business of selling information, and our information, our answers must be communicated. We've got to communicate those answers to clients. That's why they're hiring us in the first place. Excellent communication is a necessary part of our process. It's got to be a priority. Excellent communication is a necessary part of our process. It has to be a priority. You signal the importance of your client's case by showing them you have time to work on their case. If you're constantly busy in court, that's going to create a real friction point in terms of the client believing that you have the adequate time to handle their important matter. If you show that you have time to communicate with them, you're telling them, I have time to work on your case. I have the ability at my office to give the adequate attention to detail that is going to be required to make sure that your case is handled the right way. So failure to communicate, explanation, or reason number 3. Excuse number 3 is telephone tag, right? I've tried to call my client back, but then I miss them. They don't answer my call. They call me back. I'm calling them back. They call me back. If you're playing back and forth with your client by phone, this signals that you don't have a time to set up return phone calls. That's why that schedule is so important. Text or email your client proposing a good time for a phone call. Don't just keep calling back and forth. Text them or email a time for a phone call. If you have somebody else on your team that helps schedule these calls, if you got a block of time where you're scheduled to return phone calls and your team knows that, they can put it on the schedule. You don't have to worry about it anymore. Having a regular time each week set aside for client calls tells the client that you can be reached, but that you are not simply available on call 24 hours a day. That's one of the beauties of scheduling. So if you want to, again, maximize time and make sure that client isn't calling you, you answer the question, get off the phone, calls you back, has another question, you answer, get off the phone. 2 days later, they remember their third question. If you have regularly scheduled phone calls, your client is more likely to list out the different issues that they have, different questions that they have about their case, and come prepared with those questions when they call in. If your assistant is scheduling these phone calls, or if you are sending out a text or email, put a little note in that email that says, please have your list of questions ready to go. I want to get all of your questions answered. So please write these down so that you don't forget. I want to make sure that we don't miss anything that is important to your peace of mind. Right? Couch it in those terms of, I want to make sure that you are being adequately taken care of, and that we get all of your questions answered. So make sure you write them down. Make sure you write those questions down so that we don't forget anything. We want to get it all addressed and make sure that it is all lined up. Help your client to be prepared for that conversation. Having a repeat time sets up that great cadence with your client. Again, and it sets this expectation that you're not always available. If you send an email to your client at 2:00 in the morning, you send an email to your client at 5:00 in the morning, you send an email to your client at 8:00 at night, you are telling the client that you are available for communication at those times. And again, maybe that's the way that you operate. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with answering late night emails. I've done it many times in my life. But where you write those emails to your client at those times, you're telling your client, I'm available 24 hours a day. Maybe that's the message that you want to send. Again, as we're trying to move towards constant communication, immediate response, maybe that's your individual selling proposition right there. I can be reached 24 hours a day. And if that's the way that you want to frame it, then that's totally fine. But know that if you're sending those emails at that time, that is what you're signaling to your client. Fourth thing that we need to demystify when it comes to client communication, here's the fourth excuse, is that my client asks me the same questions. No matter how many times I talk to them, they ask me the same questions. For some of our clients, that's just going to happen. For some of our clients, whether it is because of a mental disability or a difficulty with memory or something else going on in their lives. I mean, we deal with a lot of people in the DWI arena that have serious addiction issues. You're going to probably have to have the same questions get answered multiple times. And again, don't pretend like this is some crazy thing every time that happens. Expect that. It is delusional to think that every client is going to get it on the first time. So don't be delusional. If your client is always asking the same question, refer them to your written action plan. Refer them to your written action plan. If you've got this action plan, then you're going to be in good shape. So after the client consultation, give them an action plan, tell them how the case is going to go, explain what the process is going to look like, what the attorney-client relationship is going to look like, and refer them then to answers that you previously given them in the action plan. The action plan honestly started at our office. The action plan that we use to follow up a client consultation at our office started with my inability to get my client to do the alcohol assessment. I would have clients that court date after court date would say, we'd come to court ready to enter a plea on a DWI. Okay, are we ready to go? Do you have the action plan? And they would look at me like this is the first time that they'd ever heard of this alcohol assessment. You never said anything about that. And I'm like thinking to myself, I say that every consultation. I don't change the way I say this. I say it every consultation. And the reason that we've continued the court date the last 3 times was so that you could get an alcohol assessment. That was the only reason that we continued it. But there was always this, why, I mean, you never said anything about this. And so I got tired of this, constant. Again, there are clients that mentally really do need a lot of reminding, a lot of prompting, and that is a different situation. But for the client that's just kind of using this as an excuse, you never told me about this, the action plan eliminated that, because it's like, I put this in the action plan. We talked about it in the consultation. You've heard about it. So it kind of removes that excuse, and it put the client in the driver's seat of, okay, here's what I need to do. Here is my list of things that I need to take care of. Now I can be engaged and involved in my defense and being prepared for court. So if you are having problems with repeat questions, ask yourself, did you give the client the information in writing as well as communicating it orally? Did you create the action plan that addresses this? Did you send the email that addresses this? Email is a great way to provide an answer for a client, for them to reference without having to call you back. So if you have clients that are kind of asking the same questions on phone call after phone call, start sending email recaps after a phone call of what you just talked about. Put them in the driver's seat. Make sure they understand what is expected, what the answers to questions were. Email recap your phone conversations. So a couple of communication tips before we finish up here. A couple of communication tips. If you want to have good client communication, first of all, you have to value the communication. Make communication as important to your practice as it is to your client, because I'm telling you right now, it's extremely important to your client. Good client communication is very high on their list in terms of, did I get what I paid for or did I not get what I paid for? If you have great client communication, there is a really good chance that the client, no matter what the outcome on the case, is going to walk away feeling like you represented them well. If you have poor client communication, no matter how good the outcome is on the case, it's likely that the client is going to walk away with a bad taste in their mouth. Give the client as much information as you can in writing. So this is the second communication tip. Give as much information to the client as you can in writing. That way they can consume it and digest it on their own schedule. Let them consume it and digest it. Think about it. Go back to it for a referral. Give them that information in writing as much as possible. If they don't have it, then they can't reference it, and the only reference manual will be you. Don't make yourself the reference manual. You want to give them a reference manual. Don't make yourself the reference manual. Use client relationship software as much as possible to communicate proactively with clients. We use Clio, Clio Grow, Clio Manage. That software has great CRM software that is built directly into the software, directly into their case management system. Use that. There's all kinds of great legal softwares out there. There's all kinds of non-legal software that does this type of proactive communication, but use it to communicate with your client frequently and mindlessly. Frequently and mindlessly. If you're sending reminders about court dates that you can automate, reminders about appointments that you can automate, do that. Make your communication mindless. This doesn't mean to send valueless, mindless emails to your client, but if you're using CRM software, then you're removing the need to constantly be thinking about that communication. Constantly be thinking about that, reaching out. Maybe you decide to set up a monthly email that is done through client relations software that just says, just checking in with you, wanted to see if you have any questions. That's it. I mean, there's all kinds of simple ideas on this front, but if you can automate that communication, if you can automate the reminders to your client about court, about an upcoming meeting that they might have, do that. You are going to get the credit for the communication in the client's mind. Doesn't matter if it's automated or manual. You're going to get the credit for that good communication. So over communicate. As long as you are not becoming spam to your client, over communicate and automate when possible. Communicate. Point number 3, communication tip number 3, communicate proactively. Let clients know any updates about their case as soon as you possibly can, proactively. If you get the blood result in, let your client know. If you get a driving impaired report in, let your client know. Send them a copy. If you file a notice of objection, let your client know. Show your homework. Let the client know that you are doing things on their case. If there is any type of change, anything that happens in terms of scheduling on the client's case, be proactive. Let your client know what is happening. A lot of times with criminal cases, there are long down periods in district court between one court date and the next with not a lot happening. So if there is any reason to communicate with your client, put that into your system, that update be sent to the client. Let them know that you are thinking about your case. Let them know that you are working on the case. It's super important to be proactive with communication because you can actually eliminate a lot of check-ins the other way if you just show that you're constantly going to be pushing information as it comes up. Finally, if you have somebody else at the office, so this last communication tip does not apply to the solo practitioner, but if you have other people at the office, utilize them. Utilize your staff, whether that's a associate attorney, paralegal, somebody that's answering your phones. Make sure that you are utilizing your staff. When a client asks a team member a question, see if you can provide the answer through the team. See if you can provide the answer through the team. When I spoke with Brian King back on episode number 71, Brian, great episode to listen to. So go back and listen to that. A lot of good tips that are kind of in the same genre of what we're talking about today. But one of the things that Brian indicated was that in terms of the nomenclature that he uses, he does not refer to paralegals in his office as paralegals. He refers to them as case managers. And the reason for that distinction in terms of the name paralegal versus case manager is that from the client's perspective, in Brian's vantage point, a client is more likely to be comfortable communicating with their case manager, the person that is assigned to manage their case, than they are with the paralegal. If they call and they are referred over to a paralegal, they want to know, why am I not communicating to the lawyer? So I don't want to speak with the paralegal. I want to speak with my attorney. Whereas he has seen a decrease in that kind of need to talk to the attorney when he's just simply rephrased it as, this is the case manager. Because again, this is the person that now is especially assigned to your case. So even how you are communicating to the client to utilize your staff can be important from a designation standpoint. So think about ways to get clients to talk to your staff. We want to teach the client that our team is highly skilled and that they can frequently provide faster answers than the attorney can provide. And that is so true in my situation. I try to communicate that to the client during the initial consult. I'm telling you, my team is very skilled when it comes to these issues. If they need me to get involved in answering a question or to prepare something, they'll let me know. But your fastest route to getting the right answer is through my team. They're going to get it to you faster. Also, if you're using that CRM software that we just talked about, or have a good case management system, that is going to allow your team to see what the communications have been on prior occasions. So if you are documenting your prior phone calls with an email follow-up and then saving that in the client's file for the rest of your team to see, they can see what the answers have been in the past. They can see when the last client communication occurred, what have been the issues. If it is a repeat question, they can look at what the prior answer was that was given. So the more you, if you have multiple people that are working on an individual file at the office, the more that you communicate effectively internally, the better the communication is going to be externally. So document the answers that you have given. Obviously, put a copy of the action plan if you're creating one of those into the client online filing system or into the physical file, so that other team members can understand what the communication looks like. For us, Clio has allowed us to communicate much more effectively as a team, and communicating efficiently with each other helps us to communicate properly with the client. If you think about it, there's really nothing worse than getting two different answers from the same organization based on the fact that you talk to two different people. Unfortunately for me, and I hate to like badmouth the DMV, but that's one of the main problems that I think is frustrating for clients and for myself when I call the DMV. If you speak with two different people at the DMV, it's very possible you're going to get two different answers. And there's other organizations where this happens as well, right? You call in, one person is telling you one thing, you call back, the second person that you talk to is gives you a different answer. This inconsistency destroys trust. If you have multiple people that are involved in your office on the same case, you want to make sure that there is consistently the same communication going to the client, that you are consistently giving the right answer. So you got to make sure that you are working well together to communicate to the client. So I think that is where we will take off. I've got a couple of pieces of homework for you. So here's the homework. If you take nothing else away from what we've just talked about, but you want to improve your practice, if you implement these two simple ideas, you are going to have a huge leg up in terms of having better client communication. So number one, schedule a weekly 2-hour block of time that you will be available for consults or phone calls, and then stick to it. 1 weekly 2-hour block. Maybe you're going to find very quickly that you need 3 2-hour blocks. That's fine. Start with 1 and then build off of that, but have a regularly scheduled time to talk to clients. Number 2, this is a simple one, but I would say dangerous in terms of effectiveness. Put a sticky note on your computer that says, I'm selling communication. I'm selling communication. That's what we're in the business of selling as lawyers, communication. We're selling information. We're selling communication. If you are not communicating well with your client, you are not going to have clients leave your office the way that you want them to leave your office, which is you want them to go out and sing your praises from the rooftops so that more people will call you. If you have great client communication, you are going to create wild clients that go out into the community and communicate to their friends, tell their friends about you, tell other people about you. They're going to sing your praises. If you have poor client communication, you will either get 0 referrals from that client or worse, negative publicity. So make sure that you are doing everything that you can to recognize in your own brain that you are in the business of selling communication. Look forward to speaking with you next time. If you found the information in this podcast to be valuable, I simply ask that you pay it forward and share this podcast with another member of the legal community. Also, if you would leave us a rating or a review on whatever platform you are listening on, I would greatly appreciate it.